I did not interface with musicians as much as some of the other people like Marcus and the sales people and some of the other people. But there are a few that are special to me. And one, of course, is Joe Zawinul, because I had talked to Joe on the phone because he had bought a ring modulator and used it with his Rhodes piano with Cannonball Adderley. So they were doing a gig at what was the main jazz spot in LA at the time, which was Chelly's Manhole. And I never had any personal discussion with Joe. It's all just ring modulator stuff, and I didn't know if he was married. He didn't know if I was married. We didn't know nothing about kids, marriage, anything, just technical. So I went to Chelly's Manhole, and it was the first time I'd ever been to a jazz concert where I wanted to dance. It was so great. And at the break, I went back to this little room they call, there's always the green room. Well, this was a tiny little thing. And I stuck my head in the door and I said, I'm coming to say hello to Joe. Joe turned around and looked at me and he pointed at me and said, July 7. And that turns out to be his birth date and my birth date. And I absolutely have no recollection of ever telling him that that was my birthday, because we never had that kind of discussion. But eventually he, of course, started Weather Report, and I got a call from him, said, Tom, of course, he kind of had this gruff voice. He kind of talked a little like Miles. He said, I just bought one of your 8-voice. Could you show me a few things about it? And so I said, sure. And I hadn't had a lot of experience with musicians of his caliber in terms of one-to-one. So I innocently went out to his house. In those days, he lived in Pasadena, and that's about 30, 40-minute drive from home. I went out and he had the thing set up. He had a little, he had his studio set up in the living room of his house in Pasadena. And I sat there with him for a couple hours, and I'm talking attack, decay, and sync, and VCO 1, VCO 2, VCO, VCF, and that's all I know. I'm not a keyboard player. I'm not a musician. So, and I could tell as we went along that, he wasn't really picking up what I was saying, but eventually we ended the session. I drove home and remember telling my sales manager, well, Joe's just going to take it back to the store and get his money back, because. So a few weeks go by, I get a phone call, and again it's, Tom, you got to hear this sound I got on your machine. I'm thinking, what? I mean, he's non-technical. And so I went out. He welcomed me into his house, and he then played for me a rough mix of Birdland. And of course, that blew me away. And I learned a lesson in that great musicians know their instruments. Now that sounds like obviously, that's such an obvious statement, but they know, and I'm capital K, know their instruments. And what he did is he took it as a musical instrument. He made it do what he wanted. And I'd never heard a sound like the big band sound he gets on Birdland. It's just amazing.
There were just such amazing artists coming through all the time. And Tom had, people loved knowing Tom. So, it was like, it was no surprise if Joe Zawinul is going to come by, and I would get to do product demos and stuff. And I remember we had the system done, and Tom one time says, as a friend of mine wants to come by, would you give him a demo, all this stuff? I said, sure. Who is it? He goes, well, it's Oscar Peterson. And you can imagine, for me, I'm 20 or something at the time. And it's like, I'm not going to play for Oscar Peterson. and Oscar, so what a wonderful surprise to find out this complete icon. I mean, the mastery of the piano that just is mind blowing. And to find that, number one, he's a complete gentleman, just the sweetest man you could meet. And he was a synthesizer fan. He had an unbelievable synthesizer collection. How I had no idea. And he just put me at ease. He's just like, don't worry about it, and go ahead and play. And I'm, making sequences and showing him how it loops and everything. And it was just wonderful. I mean, being able to demo that stuff for him, taking the Oberheim System up to Quincy Jones's house and showing Quincy, and Quincy saying things like, so how would you program Billie Jean on that? Like, well, here. And I'm playing Billie Jean for Quincy Jones, or, being able to show Eddie Van Halen the OBXA for the first time. There's so many great stories. Working with great songwriters, was a big part of how I, was able to so easily and luckily get into doing recording sessions. To have a great songwriter like Steve Kipner call me up and go, doing this track for Olivia Newton-John, and I'd really feel better if you could be at the studio with us, because we're doing the sequencer and drum machine and it's all new. And it's like, I'd be happy to do that. And, they wouldn't have had to even pay me to do things like that. And it was just really, really so great. So many stories. There's even, there's a guy who worked in production. He was like managing aspects of production, really nice guy. He was a keyboard player like many of us. And so he would play with all the gear. And he wrote a song early on with the Oberheim System and managed to sell it. And it's a song called Jump, not the Van Halen Jump, but the Jump that came out at virtually the same time. That was a huge hit for the Pointer Sisters. And that song is all Oberheim System. And that guy, Steve Mitchell, who co-wrote that song, went on to have a great songwriting career as a result of him, being at Oberheim and mastering that gear and writing a great song. So it was good times.
Around 2007, 2008, I wasn't doing anything yet. I hadn't started the reintroduction of the SEM yet, and I was just interested in looking at some stuff that I'd done on the 4-voice, 8-voice. So at that point, Lyle was living in Los Angeles area, and I went down and met him and said I'd like to borrow it. And then my plan was to restore it because it needed some work. But then I got very busy with other stuff, and that went on for years. I had every intention of restoring the unit, but the years went by, and then Lyle passed away. And then somebody suggested I'd see a video of Lyle, and on that video he says, I gave it to Tom, and that was a total surprise. That's the story there. He didn't tell me about it, and I certainly didn't expect it. I was planning to restore it and give it back to him. I had every intention of that, but just the things he would do with an 8-voice would just, make me cry. Oh, God, yes.